The scent of gunpowder and gas canisters hung thick over Trost district, and Marlowe Dietz had learned to hate that smell more than the smell of blood. He was 19, 3 months out of the 103rd Cadet Corps, and he had spent the last 40 minutes doing the only job the Garrison actually trained you for anymore, watching people die and trying not to join them. The wall had broken at 0600. A 12-foot gap where the outer gate should have been, chewed open by something big enough that nobody who'd seen it up close had lived to describe it properly. Since then it had been Titans, the ordinary kind, the shambling 7 to 15 meter kind, the kind that smiled with too many teeth and reached through rooftops for anything that moved. Marlowe's squad had lost 2 men by 8. By 9, they'd lost count of how many civilians they hadn't been fast enough to save. By 10:30, something landed on the wall that wasn't a Titan at all. Marlowe was mid-swing on his ODM cables, dragging himself up the inner face of wall rows to get eyes on the eastern breach, when the air in front of him did something wrong. Not a shimmer, not smoke. A tear. A seam of violet-white light that opened 4 meters off the stone like someone had taken a knife to the sky itself and cut a slit into somewhere else. It made a sound like a held breath finally released, a low bone-deep hum that Marlowe felt in his teeth before he heard it in his ears. Something stepped out of it, not fell, stepped, unhurried, 1 foot finding the top of the wall like it was a floor built specifically for him. Marlowe's blades stayed sheathed. His hands simply forgot what they were for. The thing, and Marlowe's brain insisted on thing because nothing about the silhouette matched a person, stood roughly the height of a tall man, built lean and hard under smooth, dark green plating that looked less like skin and more like the shell of some obscene insect. A tail, thick as a grown man's arm, swept out behind it and curled with an idle, satisfied twitch, the way a cat's tail moves when it already knows it's caught something. 2 small membranous wings sat folded against a narrow back. Its head was elongated, crowned with something that looked almost mechanical, and when it turned to survey the district below, the smoke, the screaming, the shattered rooftops, the dumb colossal shapes wading through the ruins, its eyes caught the light violet and amused. It smiled. Actual teeth. Actual expression. Nothing about a Titan smiled like that. "Well," the creature said, and its voice carried easily over 100 meters of chaos. Conversational, almost bored. "This is unexpected." Marlowe's radio crackled against his ear. Commander Voss, 200 meters south, barking coordinates to a flare team, and Marlowe realized with a lurch that no one else had seen it yet. He was the only living witness to whatever had just opened a hole in the sky over Trost and climbed out of it wearing a smile. He did the only thing 19 years of training had actually prepared him to do. He fired a flare, the signal for unknown hostile, command attention required, and swung hard for the nearest rooftop to get distance. The creature's head turned, found him instantly, the way a predator finds motion in grass. "Oh," it said, delighted. "You can see me. How refreshing." It tilted its head, studying Marlowe's gear, the cables, the twin blades, the green cloak snapping in the wind, cataloging him the way a man might study an interesting species of beetle, grappling hooks and steel. Charming. Primitive, but charming. Its gaze slid past him, out over the breach, over the shambling Titans below, and something in its expression sharpened into genuine hungry curiosity. And those things, big, slow, stupid-looking, regenerating, I'd wager, from the way that one's shoulder is knitting back together. A pause. A small, private laugh. "Do you know, I think I might actually be somewhere new." Marlowe's hands were shaking on the cable trigger. He forced them steady. "Identify yourself," he shouted, and hated how thin his voice sounded against that easy, terrible calm. "This is Garrison-controlled airspace. State your business, or what?" The creature, Marlowe would not have a name for it for another 6 minutes, drifted forward off the wall, unhurried, weightless, hanging in open air with no cable, no gear, nothing holding him up but whatever he was. 20 meters. 15. Close enough now that Marlowe could see the faint violet glow pulse once behind those eyes, like something breathing. "Or you'll do what these things are doing." A lazy gesture down at the ordinary titans tearing through Trost streets. "Flail? Scream? Die interestingly, I hope, because so far this world is disappointing me." He landed on the rooftop 8 meters from Marlowe. Didn't crouch to absorb the impact. Didn't need to. The tiles didn't even crack. "Sell," he said, as if it answered a question no one had actually asked, spreading his arms slightly, presenting himself like a performer taking a stage. "Perfect sell if you want the full title, though I doubt it'll mean anything to you. I come from a rather more interesting universe than this one. Saiyans, gods, a boy who turns gold when he's angry, that sort of thing. And I was, until about 4 minutes ago, mid-conversation with a rift in reality that apparently had opinions about where I belonged." He glanced around at Trost, at the smoke, at the wall, at the titan whose head had just turned, slow and dumb, toward the sound of voices. "This is new. I like new." Marlowe's blade cleared its sheath on pure reflex. "Stay where you are." Cell looked at the blade, looked at Marlowe, and laughed. Not cruel, not yet, just genuinely, warmly amused. The laugh of a man watching a child pick up a stick and declare it a sword. "You're going to want to put that away," Cell said. "Not because I'll hurt you, though I might, we'll see how the morning develops, but because it's embarrassing, and I find I still have some capacity left for second-hand embarrassment." He drifted a fraction closer, tail curling. "Tell me something." "That," a nod toward the 15-meter titan now lumbering their direction, drawn by motion and noise, jaw already unhinging in anticipation. "Is that the local wildlife, or is that supposed to be a threat?" As if in answer, the titan reached the base of the building and simply tore through the corner of it, fingers the size of tree trunks raking splinters and stone into the street. Marlowe threw himself sideways on his cables, years of drilled reflex kicking in before conscious thought caught up, and he was already screaming the district-wide distress code into his radio. "Contact, contact, unknown hostile plus active titan, Trost eastern wall, all units converge," when he looked back and saw something that stopped the words in his throat. Cell hadn't moved. The titan's hand closed around the space where he'd been standing, around empty air, around the man who was simply, calmly, still floating there, having not so much dodged the blow as declined to acknowledge it was relevant. The fingers passed through where a body should have been and found nothing because Cell had drifted 18 inches to the left with the unhurried ease of a man stepping around a puddle. "Ah," Cell said, and now there was real interest in his voice, the first thing all morning that seemed to actually please him. "There we are. Something with a little mass behind it." He reached out. Not a punch, not yet, just 2 fingers extended, almost lazy, and touched the titan's forearm as it swept past. The arm came apart at the elbow. Not torn, not ripped. Sliced so cleanly and so suddenly that steam didn't even begin billowing from the wound until a full second after the severed limb had already hit the street below, and the titan itself was still finishing the motion of a swing that no longer had a hand attached to it, its idiot face contorting into something that might have been the beginning of pain. Marlowe hung frozen on his cables 40 meters up, and understood in one cold drop of his stomach that everything the Garrison thought it knew about the ceiling of violence in this world had just been proven wrong. Cell watched the stump cauterize and begin, slowly, to regenerate, new tissue steaming and knitting at a fraction of his own effortless speed, and made a small, considering sound in his throat, equal parts scientist and predator. "Regeneration," he said, mostly to himself. "Slow, crude, nothing like mine." He turned his head and found Marlowe again, still hanging there, still alive only because Cell hadn't yet decided he was worth killing. "You, boy with the blades, I have questions, and you're going to answer them, because the alternative is considerably worse for you than a conversation." He drifted closer, and for the first time something almost gentle entered his voice, the gentleness of a cat that has decided for the moment not to play with its food. "What is this place? What are those?" And most importantly, his smile widened, violet eyes bright with an appetite Marlowe didn't yet have a name for, who, in this entire world, is going to be a real challenge. Commander Erwin Voss had survived 11 years in the Garrison by trusting exactly two things: the discipline of his men and his own eyes. Standing on the ramparts 200 meters south of the breach, watching a 15-meter Titan's severed arm steam in the street below, a figure who hadn't so much as raised his voice, he found both of those instincts screaming at him that neither would be enough today. "Report," he snapped at the signal runner skidding to a halt beside him, though his eyes never left the green-plated shape drifting lazily above the rooftops like it owned the sky. "Sir, Dietz's squad, unknown hostile, non-Titan classification. Sir, it took a Titan's arm off with 2 fingers." "I can see that, soldier." Voss's mustache twitched, the only outward crack in a face that had learned long ago not to show fear where the men could see it. 60 meters out, another Titan, an 8-meter, quick on its feet, had noticed the commotion and was closing on the rooftop where the creature hovered. Voss lifted his flare gun on pure instinct, the order half-formed in his throat. "Converge, all cables, bring it down," and then stopped, because some deeper, colder part of 11 years' experience told him that whatever was about to happen next, ODM cables and steel were not going to be the deciding factor. The 8-meter Titan reached for Cell with both hands. Cell didn't dodge this time. He caught one wrist, one hand, negligent, almost bored, and simply threw, and the 8-meter Titan's entire body left the ground and sailed 40 meters through the air to crash through the shattered remains of a bakery, timber and stone folding around it like paper. "Sir!" The runner's voice had gone very small. "Orders?" Voss watched Cell straighten in midair, brush an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder with theatrical precision, and turn, slowly, almost lazily, to look directly at the wall where Voss stood. 200 meters, and Voss would have sworn the thing's violet eyes found his own as easily as if there'd been no distance at all. "Sound full recall," Voss said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "Get every civilian still inside the breach line moving toward the interior gate. And get me a runner to HQ. Commander Voss requests immediate escalation to Walrose Command. Tell them." He hesitated, watching Cell drift down toward the street, toward Dietz's frozen, hanging form, unhurried as a man taking an evening walk. "Tell them we don't have a Titan problem in Trost anymore. Tell them we have something else, and I don't yet know what to call it." Below, in the smoke and ruin of a district already broken once that morning, Cell reached Marlowe's rooftop, folded his arms, and waited, patient, amused, and entirely unbothered, for someone, anyone, in this strange new world to finally give him a reason to stop holding back. The report reached Wall Rose Command inside the hour, and inside 2 hours it had done what no ordinary Titan breach ever managed. It got the attention of people who normally didn't concern themselves with district-level chaos until the casualty count demanded it. Premier Zackley's office didn't handle field intelligence directly, but the military police liaison stationed in Trost did, and by noon a coded transmission had gone out that made careful, deliberate use of a word nobody wanted to use: anomaly. Not Titan, not abnormal. Anomaly? Something the classification manuals had no box for. Something that flew without wings that worked, tore Titan flesh like wet paper, and had, according to 3 independent Garrison witnesses, spoken fluent, conversational Eldian tongue within minutes of arriving. Marlowe Dietz gave his account 4 times to 4 different officers before the day was over, and by the 4th telling his hands had finally stopped shaking, replaced by something colder and more useful. The particular clarity of a man who has looked directly at the ceiling of what's possible and had to redraw it. "He didn't kill me," Marlowe told the 4th officer, a narrow-faced MP captain named Reeve, who took notes with unsettling calm. "He could have. Twice. He just talked, asked questions. Wanted to know what a Titan was, why we don't just kill them all at once. Why we live behind walls instead of hunting them properly." Marlowe swallowed. "He called us primitive. Not cruel about it. Just certain. And then he let you go. He got bored," Marlowe said. "That's the word he used. Bored. Said the district wasn't interesting enough and he wanted to see more of the world before he decided whether it was worth his time." Captain Reeves' pen stopped moving. Decided whether it was worth his time to do what? Marlowe hadn't had a good answer for that then, and he didn't have one now. But he remembered the exact tilt of Sel's head when he'd said it, the private, considering smile, and it had not been the expression of something planning to leave quietly. Sel, in fact, had already decided several things, and none of them involved waiting politely for this world's soldiers to catch up. He'd left Trost an hour after Marlowe's squad regrouped, rising off the rooftop in a lazy vertical column that drew a fresh round of screaming from the civilians still being herded toward the interior gate. Screaming he found, if he was honest, a little flattering. He climbed until Wall Rose was a thin gray ribbon far below, and the whole absurd geography of this world opened up beneath him. 3 concentric circles of stone, districts strung along them like beads, a wilderness of forest and farmland stretching to a horizon he couldn't yet place. No ocean he could see, no cities that weren't hemmed in by wall. A civilization, as far as he could tell, that had built itself a cage and called it safety. It should have bored him. Instead, it needled at something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not since Earth, not since the ring tournament and the acid disappointment of discovering that even at full power, even perfect, the strongest fighters of that world had eventually found ways to match him. Here, everything was smaller, slower. The soldiers moved like insects on strings. The monsters were stupid, brute, regenerative but crude, no more dangerous to him than a swarm of large and unusually persistent mosquitoes. But something built the walls, he thought, drifting on the wind, arms folded, eyes tracking the geometry below with real analytical hunger. Something decided this species needed hiding from. Something out there is worth finding. He didn't have to search long. Within 3 days, he found it by the simple expedient of being impossible to ignore. The first hunter squad found him outside Ermic District, 4 days after Trost, doing something that would become, in the retelling, the defining image of that early week, standing perfectly still atop a farmhouse roof, arms crossed, watching a 15-meter Titan try and fail repeatedly with mounting and almost comic frustration, to catch him. He wasn't fighting it, he was teaching it. In the absent, cruel way a boy might teach an ant the shape of a magnifying glass. Let it lunge. Step aside. Let it lunge again. Once, memorably, he let it get close enough to actually graze his shoulder with one grasping hand, just to see what would happen. And what happened was the hand blistered and steamed on contact, some low simmer of ki bleeding off his skin like a furnace no one could see. And the Titan reeled back groaning in something that might have been pain if Titans felt pain the way men did. That was when the Garrison Hunter Squad, 6 riders, elite ODM veterans out of Ermic's regional command, dispatched the moment Trost's report reached them, arrived at the tree line, and got their first look at what command had only been able to describe in second-hand horror. Their captain, a broad-shouldered veteran named Halvard Kess, who had killed more Titans than any 3 men in his unit combined, watched Cell disable a 15-meter abnormal with what looked like idle amusement, and made the only call his training gave him. "Full engagement," he said, low. "Spread wide, cable in high, go for incapacitation, not kill. Command wants it alive if we can manage it. Questioned, contained. If it turns hostile." He hesitated, watching that green shape pivot lazily in midair, unbothered by 6 riders now converging from 3 directions. "If it turns hostile, we retreat and regroup. No heroics. Am I understood?" Cell noticed them before Kess finished the sentence. Of course he did. "Oh, good," he said, to no one and everyone, turning unhurried in the air to face the approaching riders, 6 thin lines of cable glinting in the afternoon light. "Reinforcements. I was starting to think this whole world ran on farmers and shouting." The engagement that followed lasted 11 minutes, and every soldier who survived it would spend the rest of their careers describing it differently, because none of them had actually managed to see the whole thing. Cell moved faster than trained eyes could track. Not instantaneous, not quite, but fast enough that 6 veteran ODM riders, men who had spent years learning to read a Titan's telegraphed reach and time their cables to the half-second, found themselves consistently a full beat behind a target that seemed to already know where they'd be before they'd committed to being there. He didn't kill any of them. That was, Kess would later report with a mixture of relief and unease, the strangest part. Every blade that came near him he simply avoided or caught between 2 fingers, and every rider he disabled with a kind of showman's restraint. A palm to the chest that sent a man tumbling out of the air to land, hard but alive in soft farmland. A tap to a cable line, severed clean, sending a rider into a controlled crash rather than a fatal fall. "You're better than the toy soldiers back at the wall," Cell told Kess near the end, hovering 3 meters above the captain's head as Kess hung exhausted and furious on his last working cable. Blade raised uselessly, chest heaving. "Genuinely, there's technique here. Discipline. I respect that, even if it's built on equipment a child from my world would find quaint." He tilted his head, studying Kess the way he'd studied Marlowe days before. Cataloging, weighing. "But you're not what I'm looking for. None of you are. You're brave and you're skilled, and you are without exception fragile. I need to know if this world has anything that isn't. There are things you haven't seen," Kess spat, blood in his mouth, refusing to lower his blade even knowing it was pointless. "Things stronger than any of us. If you think a squad of Garrison riders is the ceiling of what this world can throw at you," Cell's smile sharpened, genuine interest breaking through the boredom for the first time since Trost. "Now that," he said, "is the first useful thing anyone in this world has said to me." He set Kess down gently, gently enough that the gesture felt almost more insulting than a killing blow would have, and rose back into the sky, already turning east, toward wherever instinct and the shape of this strange new world suggested the real power might be hiding. Kess watched him go, breathing hard, and keyed his radio with a shaking hand. Command, this is Kess. Engagement concluded. 5 wounded. None fatal. Hostile has withdrawn eastbound. A pause, choosing the next words with the care of a man who understood they'd be repeated in briefing rooms for months. Recommend immediate reclassification. This is not a rogue Titan variant. This is not a shifter. Whatever we're dealing with operates on a level none of our doctrine accounts for, and it is actively searching for something stronger than us to test itself against. Another pause, longer. God help us if it finds it. Word moved faster than Cell did, which was itself unusual, and by the time he crossed into the airspace above the interior districts 3 days later, the machinery of a frightened, competent government had already begun turning against him in earnest. The military police brigade, which spent most of its existence guarding the royal capital and skimming resources meant for the Survey Corps, found itself for once genuinely useful. Intelligence gathering, containment planning, a coordinated effort with the Garrison to track the anomaly's movement, and, if possible, funnel it toward a killing ground where numbers might make up for what individual skill couldn't. Even the Survey Corps, chronically underfunded, chronically disrespected, the only branch of the military that had ever actually killed a Titan in genuinely offensive combat, was quietly brought into the planning, because whatever bureaucratic pride existed in the capital, someone with sense had pointed out that the Corps had more real combat experience against overwhelming odds than anyone else in the military. And in a windowless room in the interior, 3 men who did not officially represent any branch of the government at all listened to Kess's report, and to Marlowe's, and to a dozen others gathered in the days since Trost, and reached a very different conclusion than the one command wanted circulated. "It's not looking for territory," said the eldest of the 3, a gaunt man whose Eldian features carried the particular weariness of someone who had spent decades keeping secrets that could end the world twice over. "It's not looking for food, or converts, or even conquest. As far as I can tell, every witness says the same thing. It's testing, looking for a ceiling, looking for someone who can actually make it work. Then we don't give it one," said the youngest, sharper, more anxious. "We contain it, kill it if we can, and, with respect," the third interrupted, quiet and grim, "you didn't watch 6 of Kess's best riders get handled like children. I don't think kill it if we can is a plan. I think it's a hope." He looked at the eldest man, and something passed between them that neither said aloud, though both were clearly thinking it. There is one thing in this world that might actually be able to give it what it's looking for. You know which one I mean. The eldest man's jaw tightened. That is not a card I intend to play unless there is no other choice left. Then pray there's another choice, the youngest said, because from where I'm sitting, this thing isn't going to stop looking until it finds out. Cell, unaware of and entirely uninterested in the anxious calculus being run in windowless rooms on his behalf, had by then reached the edge of the interior wall system and paused, hovering above a wide stretch of farmland at dusk, watching lantern light flicker on in 100 small windows below. An entire civilization going about its evening, oblivious to how thin the walls around its comfort truly were. He thought, not for the first time since arriving, of the ring tournament back home, of Gohan, of the particular, singular satisfaction of finally meeting something that could actually push back. Somewhere in this world, he was increasingly certain, was a version of that fight waiting for him. The soldiers were brave. The Titans were strange, mindless, unsettling in their crude regeneration, Genuinely, he had to admit, more interesting biologically than anything he'd fought at home, closer kin to his own cellular design than he wanted to examine too closely. But none of it was a challenge. Not yet. He turned his face toward the deepening dark over the horizon, toward whatever lay beyond this world's obsessive walls, and allowed himself, for the first time since the rift had spat him out, something almost like patience. "Fine," he said to no one, to the wind, to a world that hadn't yet shown him its teeth. "Take your time finding him. I've got nowhere better to be." Behind him, unseen in the gathering dark, 3 separate hunting parties converged on his last known position. Cables singing, orders whispered, an entire military apparatus quietly, desperately hoping that whatever card the man in the windowless room refused to play would never need playing at all. Levi Ackerman received the order with his usual expression, which was to say no expression at all, and heard it out in full before saying anything. "You want me," he said slowly, "to go alone." The man across the table, Erwin Smith, 3 years into commanding the Survey Corps and already carrying himself like someone who'd aged a decade doing it, didn't flinch from the flat disbelief in Levi's voice. "Not entirely alone. A support squad will shadow at distance, ready to extract you if things go badly. But the initial contact, yes, alone. Because command thinks one man walking up to this thing and getting himself killed is a better use of resources than a coordinated assault. Because command thinks a coordinated assault already failed once," Erwin said, "and lost 5 men doing it, and because whatever intelligence we have suggests this thing isn't interested in armies, it's interested in individuals. It wants to know if there's anyone in this world who can match it." He set a thin folder on the table between them. Kess's report, Marlowe's statement, 3 other witness accounts, all converging on the same impossible picture. "You are, by a significant margin, the strongest soldier we have. If there's anyone who can give it what it's looking for without simply dying in the attempt, it's you." Levi didn't open the folder. He'd already read it twice. "And if I can't give it what it wants, then we've learned something important about the actual ceiling of the threat," Erwin said, "and we adjust from there. I won't pretend that's a comfortable answer. It's the only honest one I have." Levi was quiet for a long moment, turning a cup of tea he hadn't touched in slow, precise half circles on the table. He thought about 6 of Kess's best riders, men he'd trained alongside, men whose skill he respected, coming back with stories of being handled like children by something that hadn't even bothered to kill them. "Fine," he said finally, "but if this thing's half as fast as they're saying, I want the new gear. The prototype blades, the tighter cable response, not the standard issue garbage." Erwin almost smiled. Already being prepared. They found Cell 3 days later, exactly where Erwin's intelligence had predicted, drifting in a slow, patient circuit above the ruins of an abandoned watchtower 15 kilometers past the interior wall, waiting with the particular stillness of something that had all the time in the world and had decided to spend it doing nothing in particular. Levi approached on foot for the last half-kilometer, cables holstered, blades sheathed, boots silent on cracked stone. It wasn't strategy exactly, more instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through years in the capital's underground before the Corps ever found him. "You didn't announce yourself to something that could already sense you coming. You made it decide for itself that you were worth its attention." Cell noticed him at 200 meters anyway. "There you are," he said, without turning, still hanging in the air above the tower's broken parapet, tail curling lazily. I was starting to wonder if this world was going to send anyone worth the trip. He turned then, and violet eyes swept over Levi with the same cataloging hunger he'd given Kess. The gear, the twin blades, the compact coiled way Levi carried himself. Nothing wasted, nothing performative. Something in Cell's expression shifted, interest sharpening into something closer to genuine attention. Now that's a different posture entirely. You're the thing that's been terrorizing my soldiers, Levi said. Flat, no preamble. I've been testing them, Cell corrected, drifting lower, settling onto the parapet with the same unhurried precision he'd shown landing on Marlowe's rooftop days before. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to appreciate it yet. Terrorizing implies I wanted them afraid. Mostly I wanted them to try harder than they did. He tilted his head, studying Levi at close range now, 6 meters and closing. You're smaller than I expected. Humanity's strongest soldier. That's the title they've been throwing around in the reports I've overheard. Back at that farmhouse. Big name for someone who barely comes up to my chest. Big names get handed out by people with nothing better to do, Levi said. I've killed things bigger than you plenty of times. Titans, Cell said, dismissive, almost bored. Slow, stupid, regenerating garbage. I've watched them. I've touched them. He held up 2 fingers, the same gesture that had taken a Titan's arm off outside Trost. They're not a fight, they're an inconvenience with teeth. His smile sharpened, and for the first time, something genuinely predatory crept into his voice, all the boredom of the last week burning off at once. You, though, you're the first thing in this entire ridiculous walled-off world that's actually looked at me like you believe you might win. I don't believe anything yet, Levi said. I haven't seen what you can do. Cell laughed, delighted, genuine, the laugh of a man finally handed the toy he'd been promised. Then let's fix that. He didn't wait for Levi to draw, he simply moved, closed 6 meters in a blink, faster than Levi's eyes could properly track, faster than anything Levi had fought in his life, a green blur that should have ended the confrontation before it began. Levi's blades were already out. He didn't know, later, how he'd managed it. Some combination of instinct honed through years of underground knife fights and Titan combat, some deeper animal sense that had clocked the shift in Cell's stance a half-second before the movement itself. He twisted, blade angled to deflect rather than block outright, cable already firing into the tower's stonework to yank him sideways out of the strike zone entirely. Cell's palm passed through the space where Levi's chest had been and cratered the parapet stone behind him into powder. There it is, Cell said, genuine delight cracking through, already turning, already tracking Levi's cable-assisted arc through the air with eyes that seemed to anticipate the trajectory before it finished. You actually dodged that. Nobody in this world has dodged anything I've thrown at full intent. He was moving again before he finished speaking, closing the gap with the same terrible unhurried ease, and this time when Levi's blade came around in a full committed arc, steel singing, cable snapping taut to add momentum to the swing, Cell simply caught the blade between 2 fingers. Steel screamed against flesh that didn't yield, didn't cut, didn't even mark. Good technique, Cell said, almost gentle, studying the blade pinned uselessly in his grip, while Levi's mind raced through the sudden, cold recalibration every soldier eventually faced against something beyond their ceiling. Genuinely. If you'd caught me off guard, that might have actually hurt. His grip tightened and the blade, masterwork steel, the tightest tolerance edge the core's smiths could produce, folded and snapped like a dry twig. But it doesn't matter how good the technique is if the tool can't do the job. Levi didn't hesitate. He released the broken blade, drew his second, and used the half-second of Cell's satisfied pause to put 15 meters of open air between them on his cables, buying space, buying time, buying the one thing that had kept him alive against every impossible fight he'd ever walked into, the ability to actually think. Faster than anything I've fought, stronger than anything I've fought, doesn't need to breathe hard, doesn't tire, doesn't even seem to be trying yet. He landed on a fractured section of tower roof, blade steady despite everything in him screaming that steady was the wrong response to what he'd just seen. This isn't a fight I win with skill alone. This is a fight I survive or I don't. Cell drifted after him, unhurried, clearly enjoying himself in a way that made Levi's skin crawl worse than any Titan's dead-eyed hunger ever had. "You're doing the math," Cell said, almost sympathetic. "I can see it happening behind your eyes, trying to work out if there's an angle, a trick, some clever technique that closes the gap between what you are and what I am." He landed 6 meters away, arms loose at his sides, radiating the particular confidence of something that had genuinely never lost. "I'll save you the trouble. There isn't one. Not this version of you." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Not cruelty exactly, something closer to actual curiosity. "Though I notice you haven't run. Kess's men ran, eventually. Sensible thing to do. You're still standing there working the problem like you think there's a solution in it somewhere. Running doesn't kill Titans either," Levi said. "You learn to work the problem or you die standing still. I chose a while ago. Something in Cell's face genuinely, unmistakably respected that." Just for a moment, the performer's smirk cracked into something almost sincere. "You know," he said, "back home there was a boy, half my height, easy to underestimate, kept getting back up against fights he had no business surviving. Everyone thought he was going to die the first time I actually cut loose on him." Cell's tail curled, thoughtful. He didn't, not that day, turned into the single most annoying variable in my entire existence. He studied Levi with fresh interest, something almost like recognition. "You've got some of that same stupid, stubborn shape to you. I wonder if it means anything here, or if this world's just too small to let it matter." "Only one way to find out," Levi said, and moved. He didn't go for a clean strike this time. He'd already learned that lesson, watched a masterwork blade snap like kindling against something that didn't register steel as a threat. Instead, he used every trick 11 years underground and 3 in the Corps had taught him. False angles, cable redirects mid-swing, a faint low that became a real strike high, forcing Cell to actually react instead of simply anticipate. For 9 full exchanges it worked. Barely. Levi's blade found nothing. Not once did steel actually mark that green-plated skin, but he moved, dodged, redirected, forced Cell to expend actual effort tracking a target that refused to commit to any single readable pattern. Sweat soaked through his uniform. His shoulders screamed from a graze that had connected with enough force to nearly dislocate it despite never actually landing a real hit. Every cable anchor point was a calculated gamble against a threat that could, at any moment, simply decide the game was over. On the 10th exchange, Cell decided the game was over. He caught Levi's incoming blade in one hand again, this time not gently, and used the connection to simply pull, yanking Levi off his cable trajectory entirely and slamming him bodily into the tower's stone face hard enough to crack it. The world went white at the edges. Levi's second blade clattered from numb fingers somewhere below, and he found himself pinned, one of Cell's hands closed loosely but immovably around his throat, boots dangling a meter above the broken parapet. "There," Cell said, and his voice had gone quiet now, almost thoughtful. No cruelty in it at all, just the flat, clinical satisfaction of a question finally answered. That's the ceiling. Not bad. Genuinely, not bad. Better than anything else I've found in this entire cramped little world. But it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. His grip tightened, just slightly, testing. The question now is what I do with that information. Levi's vision swam, one hand scrabbling uselessly at wrist that felt like carved stone, and through the haze of it he found, from somewhere, the same stubborn thing that had kept him breathing through a childhood no child should have survived. "Then kill me," he managed, voice a wrecked rasp, "or let go. Standing here gloating's the most boring thing you've done all fight." Something in Cell's face flickered, surprise, and beneath it, unmistakably, something like delight. He let go. Levi dropped, caught himself on instinct with a half-second cable fire that kept him from breaking both ankles on the stone below, and came up in a defensive crouch, throat already bruising, blade gone, breathing hard and alive. Entirely, he understood with cold clarity, because Cell had decided he should be. "You've got nerve," Cell said, drifting back, arms folding, that predator's smile returning but softer now, genuinely pleased in a way nothing since his arrival had managed. Actual nerve, not the desperate kind. I like that. He rose higher into the air, putting distance between them with the unhurried confidence of something that no longer felt any need to press an advantage it had already proven. "I'm not going to kill you. Humanity's strongest. You're the closest thing to interesting this world has produced, and I've decided I'm not finished with it yet." A pause, considering. "Besides, dead things don't get better, and I have a feeling you're going to want to get better after this." "You think I'm just going to let this go?" Levi rasped, still crouched, still calculating, already running through what remained of his gear and how far the extraction squad might be. "You think there's a version of this where I don't come back?" "I'm counting on it," Cell said, and there was real warmth in it now, the closest thing to genuine camaraderie he'd shown anyone since arriving. "Bring whatever this world's got. Bring your Titan shifters if the rumors I've been hearing in farmhouse gossip have any truth to them, and I think they do, because nothing about the way your government's been tiptoeing around certain topics reads like an empty threat." His eyes gleamed, violet and hungry, and for the first time, almost fond. "Keep getting stronger, Levi Ackerman. I'll be here, and when this world finally shows me its actual best, not soldiers, not titans, but whatever it's been hiding behind 3 walls and a decade of secrets, I want you standing next to it when it happens. I have a feeling that's going to be a very good day." He rose into the darkening sky, unhurried, already turning east again, and left Levi kneeling in the rubble of a broken watchtower with a snapped blade, a bruised throat, and the absolute bone-deep certainty that everything the Corps thought it knew about the shape of this threat had just changed completely. By the time the extraction squad reached him 20 minutes later, Levi had already decided 2 things, and said them both to Erwin before the man had finished helping him onto a stretcher. "He's not trying to conquer anything," Levi said, voice a wrecked whisper, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon where a green shape had long since vanished into darkness. "He's not even really trying to kill anyone. He's looking for a fight he can actually lose." A pause, and something in Levi's expression that Erwin had never quite seen there before. Not fear exactly, but its close cousin. Respect paid at enormous cost. God help us if he finds one, because I think he already knows where to look. Erwin Smith did not sleep the night Levi returned from the watchtower. He spent it instead in the windowless room, listening to the same 3 men who'd debated the unplayed card a week earlier, and by dawn he had done something none of them expected. He asked to be let into the secret they were guarding. "You're already carrying half of it," the eldest man said, gaunt face unreadable in lamplight. "Your soldier came back alive from a fight nothing should have survived. That tells you something's changed in how this world needs to think about its own strength. I imagine you've guessed the rest." "I've guessed there's a reason Command's been sitting on something for weeks that could have ended the Trost breach in an afternoon," Erwin said. "A weapon, or a soldier who isn't quite a soldier anymore." He didn't phrase it as a question, because he'd stopped believing it was one the moment Levi described Cell's parting words. "Bring your Titan shifters, if the rumors have any truth to them." "The creature already suspects. It's not going to stop looking until someone confirms it for him, one way or another. I'd rather it be confirmed on our terms." The youngest of the three, sharper and more anxious than the other two, opened his mouth to object. The eldest man raised a hand and silenced him without looking. "There's a boy," he said, 3 months into cadet training, who inherited something during the Trost breach that shouldn't exist inside these walls. We've kept it quiet because the moment it's known, half the government wants him dissected and the other half wants him weaponized, and neither outcome keeps this world safe." A long pause. "He's fought exactly once, against a Titan of his own kind, and won badly, barely, at terrible cost, still learning what he even is. If what your soldier describes is accurate, sending him against Cell isn't a plan. It's an experiment with a 19-year-old boy as the variable." "Then don't send him to fight," Erwin said. "Send him to be seen. Cell isn't hunting a body count. He's hunting proof this world has a ceiling worth respecting. Let him see it exists. See what he does with that information before we decide whether the fight itself has to happen at all." The room went quiet for a long moment. Outside, dawn was breaking gray and thin over the interior wall, and somewhere 15 kilometers east, a green shape was almost certainly still waiting, patient as weather, for this world to finally show him something worth the trip. "His name is Eren Yeager," the eldest man said finally, quiet, resigned, the sound of a secret he'd guarded for years finally cracking open. "God help all of us for what happens next." Eren Yeager had exactly one clear memory of what it felt like to be a Titan, and it terrified him more than anything a Titan had ever done to someone else. He remembered heat first, not warmth, but a furnace-deep burning that started somewhere behind his sternum and radiated outward until his own skin felt like a container too small for what it held. He remembered his vision doubling, tripling, some animal awareness bleeding in underneath his own thoughts, instinct and rage where reason should have been. He remembered lifting a boulder the size of a house over his head to seal Trost's shattered gate, muscles that weren't his own responding to a will that was, and he remembered, afterward, waking up in a cell in chains, surrounded by soldiers who couldn't decide whether to salute him or execute him. He'd had 3 weeks since then to learn what he was. It hadn't been close to enough. "You want me to what?" he said, standing in a briefing room that smelled of old paper and candle wax, staring at Erwin Smith and a gaunt stranger he'd never met, walk up to it. "Just introduce myself?" "We want you to be present," Erwin said, "in your human form, at a safe distance, while a small escort makes contact and confirms your existence without provoking direct conflict. If it demands proof, you'll have the option, not the order, the option, to transform under controlled conditions and demonstrate that this world has something capable of matching it." His gaze was steady, but Eren had spent enough weeks around military men now to read the tension underneath. "I won't pretend this is safe. I won't pretend I know how it ends. What I can tell you is that if this thing decides this world has nothing worth its patience, the alternative is it simply keeps testing us with soldiers' lives until it finds out the hard way, or gets bored and does something worse. Eren's hands, resting on the table, curled slowly into fists. He thought about Trost, about the gate, about the boulder's weight and the terror underneath the power, and the small, sick certainty that whatever he'd become, he still didn't fully control it. "And if I say no, then you say no," Erwin said without judgment, "and we find another way, and it will almost certainly be worse." Eren was quiet for a long moment. Then, because he was 19 and furious and had spent 3 years since Wall Maria's fall, promising himself he would never again be the boy who could only watch people he loved get torn apart, he said the only thing he'd ever really been capable of saying, "Tell me where to go." They found Cell exactly where Levi had left him a week earlier, patient, unhurried, drifting above the same broken watchtower in slow, contemplative circles, as if the passage of days meant nothing to something with no need to sleep, eat, or grow tired of waiting. He noticed the approaching party from 3 kilometers out. "Of course he did. Back again," he called, as Erwin's small escort came into view across the open ground. 6 soldiers, cables holstered, blades sheathed, and at the center of them, a lean, dark-haired boy who carried himself with none of the trained economy Levi had, all raw nerve and barely leashed intensity instead. Cell drifted down to the parapet, tilting his head with fresh curiosity. "New faces. Where's my favorite short, angry one?" "Recovering," Erwin said, stopping the escort at 100 meters, close enough to speak, far enough to run, if running became necessary. "I'm Erwin Smith, commander of the Survey Corps. I understand you've been asking this world to show you its best." "I have," Cell agreed, settling fully onto the parapet, folded arms and easy patience. "So far, it's been mildly disappointing, with one notable exception." His eyes slid past Erwin, past the escort, and found Eren standing near the center of the group. Found him, Erwin would later swear, with an unnerving precision, as if some instinct in Cell had already clocked exactly what he was looking at. "And who's this?" "You brought a boy to a negotiation. Bold strategy or a very specific one?" "My name's Eren Yeager," Eren said, before Erwin could answer for him, stepping forward half a pace despite the tightening in Erwin's jaw. "You want to know if this world's got anything worth your time. I might be it." Cell's smile spread slow and genuinely delighted, and for a moment the performer's boredom of the past week fell away entirely, replaced by something sharper, hungrier, more alive. "Might be," he repeated, drifting off the parapet, closing the distance with unhurried, deliberate steps that ate the 100 meters faster than should have been possible without ever quite breaking into a run. Erwin's hand twitched toward his blade. Cell ignored him entirely, attention locked on Eren with the singular focus of a man who has finally, after a long and tedious search, found the thing he came looking for. "You've got a very particular smell to you, boy. Not human, not quite. Something layered underneath the obvious part. Something old and hungry and coiled." He stopped 3 meters away, studying Eren with open, cataloging fascination. "I've met things like you before. Different shape, same principle. Power wearing a person like a coat, waiting for permission to come out." His violet eyes gleamed. "Show me, Eren," Erwin said, low, urgent, a warning and a permission both folded into one word. Eren didn't look back at him. He was looking at Cell, at the easy, terrible confidence radiating off him, at the memory of Trost's gate, and the boulder, and the furnace heat of a power he still barely understood, and he made the same choice he'd been making, in smaller ways, every day since Wall Maria fell. He bit down. The transformation that followed was nothing like the practiced, controlled displays Cell had grown used to imagining from Kess's second-hand reports and farmhouse rumor. It was violent, explosive, lightning cracking across open sky as Eren's human shape burst outward into something 15 meters tall, muscle fiber tearing into place with wet, thunderous speed, steam boiling off newly formed flesh in a column visible for kilometers. Where a boy had stood a heartbeat earlier, now crouched something between man and monster. Broad-shouldered, exposed muscle glistening raw beneath patchy skin, teeth bared in an expression that was recognizably, unmistakably furious. Cell didn't flinch. He rose to meet it, ascending until he hovered level with the Titan's face, and for the first time since arriving in this world, something in his posture shifted from idle curiosity into genuine, focused attention. "There it is," he said, soft, almost reverent, circling once, studying the raw architecture of muscle and bone with open fascination. "Now we're finally getting somewhere." The Eren Titan's roar shook loose birds from a kilometer of tree line, and it swung, a fist the size of a small building, telegraphed by rage more than skill, exactly the kind of overcommitted opening move Cell had spent the last week teaching ordinary Titans not to bother making. He caught it, both hands braced, feet finding purchase on nothing but air itself, and for the first time since his arrival, Cell actually had to work. Muscles that had never once strained against anything in this world, finally finding real resistance, real mass, real force behind the blow. He was pushed back 4 full meters before he stopped the momentum. "Oh," Cell said, and the pure, unguarded delight in his voice was the most honest thing he'd said since stepping through the rift. "Oh, that's more like it." What followed was less a fight than a collision of forces neither side had a name for yet. The Eren Titan fought with none of Levi's precision and all of raw, furious instinct, wild swings, reckless charges, a body that regenerated damage almost as fast as Cell could inflict it, steam hissing off wounds that closed themselves in seconds. Cell met every attack with the same effortless economy he'd shown all week, but where every previous opponent had eventually been overwhelmed by sheer speed and force, Eren simply kept coming, kept absorbing punishment that should have ended a lesser fight, kept getting back up with the same stubborn, animal refusal to stay down that Cell had once, a lifetime and a universe ago, learned to respect in a half-Saiyan boy who never knew when to quit. Erwin watched from 100 meters, hand white-knuckled on his blade, calculating extraction windows he knew wouldn't matter if this went fully wrong, and understood with cold, professional clarity that he was watching something he had no actual authority over anymore. This wasn't a negotiation. It hadn't been for the last 90 seconds. It was two forces testing each other at a scale that made every strategic calculation Erwin had ever made feel suddenly brutally small. 12 minutes in, Cell caught the Eren Titan's next overcommitted swing, redirected the momentum with contemptuous ease, and drove a palm strike into the Titan's exposed chest, hard enough to crack ribs audible from a kilometer away, sending 15 meters of muscle and bone crashing through a stand of trees, hard enough to level a quarter-acre of forest. Steam billowed from the wound, slower this time, genuinely slower. Whatever reserves powered Eren's regeneration had clearly begun to strain against the pace Cell was setting. Cell drifted down to stand over the fallen Titan, and for a long moment simply looked at it, not gloating, not cruel, something closer to genuine, thoughtful appraisal. "You're not going to beat me today," he said, quiet enough that only the ragged, half-conscious thing beneath him could have heard it. "Not close. You're strong. Genuinely, remarkably strong for something that's clearly only had this power a matter of weeks, but you're raw, untrained. fighting on instinct and rage instead of anything resembling technique, throwing everything you have into single desperate swings because some part of you is terrified of what happens if you slow down and think. He crouched, studying the ruined, regenerating flesh with something almost like respect. I know that fear. I've fought people who wore it just like you do. The Titan's jaw worked, teeth grinding, unable to form words but radiating pure, exhausted defiance regardless. But you didn't run, Cell continued, straightening, drifting back up into open air. And you didn't quit, even when it was obvious 30 seconds in that you were badly outmatched. That's twice now this world's shown me that particular kind of stubborn. He turned, looking back toward Irwin and the frozen, horrified escort still holding position 100 meters back. Get him healed, get him fed, get him trained, properly, by whoever in this world actually knows how to teach someone to fight, instead of just survive. His eyes swept over Eren's slowly steaming, regenerating form one last time, and something in his expression had shifted entirely from where it started. The bored, contemptuous curiosity of a week ago replaced by something that looked, disturbingly, like genuine investment. Because I meant what I told your short friend. I'm not finished with this world. And when I come back to see how much stronger this one's gotten, I want the answer to actually surprise me. He rose into the sky without another word, unhurried as ever, and this time didn't turn east. He simply hovered there, high above the shattered tree line and the smoking ruin of the fight, watching the sun climb toward noon, and for the first time since arriving in this strange, walled-off world, allowed himself something that felt uncomfortably close to hope. Below, Irwin Smith reached the fallen Titan's side as it began, slowly and painfully, to shrink back down toward the exhausted, unconscious shape of a 19-year-old boy, and understood, watching Cell's distant, patient silhouette against the noon sky, that whatever came next for this world would not be decided by walls, or secrets, or careful government calculation. It would be decided by whether a broken, terrified boy could become, in whatever time this world had left, something strong enough to finally give a perfect being the fight he'd crossed universes looking for. 6 weeks passed, and Cell did not vanish the way everyone quietly hoped he might. He was seen, periodically, in the wilderness beyond the interior wall, sparring with nothing, testing his own limits against terrain and gravity, and the occasional unlucky Titan that wandered too close, patient in a way that unsettled Irwin more than open aggression would have. Twice he approached Garrison patrols, not to fight but to ask pointed, unsettling questions about the 9 Titans, about the founding Titan's power, about a war beyond the walls that farmhouse gossip had only half prepared him to understand. He was, in his own way, doing reconnaissance, patient, methodical, cataloging this world's true shape the way he'd once cataloged Earth's strongest fighters before deciding which of them deserved his attention. Eren trained through all 6 weeks like a man drowning who'd finally found the shore. Hange Zoe took over his instruction personally once the secret came fully into the open, no longer a closely guarded whisper in windowless rooms, but a controlled, careful truth shared with enough of command to actually build a strategy around. Levi trained him too, mercilessly, teaching him to fight with his human mind intact inside the Titan's fury instead of drowning beneath it, teaching him the same brutal economy of motion that had bought Levi 9 exchanges against something that should have ended him in 1. You don't beat something like that by being stronger, Levi told him, flat and certain, 3 weeks into training, both of them bruised and breathing hard in a clearing scarred by a month of failed sparring sessions. You beat it by making it work harder for every inch than it's ever had to. That's the only ceiling that's ever mattered against something like him. Not power, patience. Eren listened. Slowly, painfully, something in him began to shift. Not less fury, but fury with direction. Instinct sharpened by repetition into something that finally resembled skill instead of desperation. Cell watched all of it from a distance, more often than either Eren or Levi ever fully realized. He didn't interfere, didn't test them again, not directly. Some strange, unfamiliar patience had settled into him since the watchtower, an appetite willing, for once, to wait for its meal to properly ripen. He found himself in the quiet hours between observation, thinking less about conquest and more about the particular, singular satisfaction of watching something grow toward a fight worth having. It was Erwin who finally sought him out, 6 weeks to the day after the battle outside the watchtower, walking alone into open ground with empty hands and a soldier's careful courage. "You've been watching," Erwin said, when Cell descended to meet him, unhurried as always. "Training. Testing yourself against the terrain. You haven't left." "Why would I leave?" Cell said, "when the most interesting thing to happen to me in years is finally starting to get good." He studied Erwin with open curiosity. "You didn't come out here for small talk, Commander." "No," Erwin admitted. "I came to ask you a question I suspect you've already answered for yourself, but I'd like to hear it plainly." He met those violet eyes without flinching, a man who had spent years asking soldiers to walk into worse odds than this and had learned, through hard practice, never to look away from what he was asking. "What happens when he's ready?" "When Eren's trained enough, strong enough, controlled enough that the fight you've been waiting for is actually the fight you get?" Cell was quiet for a long moment, gazing east, toward wherever training grounds now shaped the boy who'd once thrown himself at a perfect being with nothing but rage and stubbornness to work with. "Then we fight," he said finally. And something in his voice had settled into a kind of honesty Erwin hadn't heard from him before. Not the performer's boredom, not the predator's hunger, just plain, simple truth. Really fight. "However long it takes to get there, however it ends." He looked back at Erwin, and for just a moment, the ancient, arrogant certainty that had defined him since he stepped through the rift cracked open into something almost human. "I've spent longer than I care to admit believing I'd already found the ceiling of what existence had to offer me. Your world just proved me wrong, twice, in the span of 6 weeks. I intend to see exactly how much higher that ceiling actually goes before I decide I've had enough of finding out." He rose into the afternoon sky, unhurried as ever, and this time Erwin understood, watching him go, that whatever waited at the end of this, however many months or years it took Eren to become strong enough to actually earn the fight Cell had crossed universes searching for, this world had changed in some fundamental, irreversible way the moment that rift tore open over Wall Rose. They had found something stronger than their walls, stronger than their armies, stronger than every careful secret they'd spent decades protecting. And rather than destroy them for it, it had decided, against every instinct in its perfect, arrogant nature, to wait. Behind him, 15 kilometers west, a boy who had once been nothing but rage and grief and a boulder's desperate weight kept training through the fading light, chasing a ceiling that had, for the first time in his life, given him something worth the climb instead of something to merely survive.